Well, I'm Helen Faulkner right now, but my name used to be Helen Larder. I was born in Homer, Michigan. I was born on a farm, and I grew up there until I was 7 years old. And I remember walking to school. We walked about a mile and a half to school. On Sundays, we'd go to Sunday school, walk to Sunday school, and usually there was two old maids that were across the road from us. They were on what they call a Blair farm now. Their father was a doctor in Detroit, and they would pick us up and take us to Sunday school usually. If we'd start out walking, but they'd usually be along and pick us up in their Model T Ford. And there was 6 of us girls all together and 4 boys. And well, it was hard because we were very poor. We lived on a tenant farm, actually. We went to a country school. It was a one-room schoolhouse where we all had all 8th grades together. Some of the grades maybe didn't have any, and then some had 2 or 3 pupils. I think there were about 30 children in the school altogether. My father, when it was real bad weather, if there was a lot of snow, he would get the horses out and get the sleighs and take us to school, or come and get us in the afternoon when we was out. And of course he always had horses. He had a Model T car, but then he would put it in the garage for the winter. He never used it in the winter. And my mother would, in the wintertime, my father would butcher pigs, and then she would render the lard out of the. They don't use lard nowadays, but they used to in those days, make pie crust and things like that out of lard. And she had to do that. And then she, during the war, she would make soap because it was hard to get soap. And she would make her own soap out of course, she would use just scrap fat for that out of the beef usually. At night we'd all have our meal together. We all sat at the table at the meal for our meals. We didn't have it hit and miss like they have it nowadays. And it was quite a time for us because we could talk and visit back and forth and tell all our stories that happened during the day. And my folks were always quite interested in what was taking place. My mother never drove a car. In fact, I never drove a car until I was 40 years old. When I graduated from high school, I went right, the very night I graduated, I went with my sister, came over to Jackson, and I had to go to work because there was no money for us. So I went to work for a family that needed help, and I think I made about $3 a week. And I finally saved up enough money to go to beauty school. I think I had $90 to go to beauty school. I had a brother that was 2 years younger than I was. He went into service, and he was stationed in Washington, D.C. He was on a lookout on the ocean for Japanese planes at night. He'd have to work at night. And then, I guess when the Japanese were defeated, he was on the way to Europe and to go to England or someplace over in Europe to be in the war, and the war was over with. It was, in fact, it was over on my daughter's birthday, the 8th of May. That's when my daughter was born. So he didn't have to go to war after all, which we were very thankful for. I worked at the Hillsdale Hospital, nurses. Practical nurse. They called them practical nurses at that time, just the nurses' helpers. And I worked at that until I retired. And my husband, they closed the dairy after he'd worked there 22 years, so he went to work at Simpson's, where they made auto parts at a factory in Litchfield there, and he worked there for 10 years before he retired. I can't think of anybody remembering anything about me. I really don't know. Just that I've led a clean life and got this far at least. That's the only thing I can think of. I've always been honest, and I never cheated anybody out of anything or done anything like that. I think my father always instilled that in me.